Die sehen wir dann alle spätestens übermorgen, aber möglicherweise schon morgen. Also unbedingt noch schauen, ob es Tickets gibt für Mittwoch oder Donnerstag. Dann zweite Runde hier beim Upper Austria Ladies in Linz. Jetzt gibt's wieder was für die Fans. Some presents for the fans. Signed tennis balls.
So her evening's work is done. And she will be back in action tomorrow. Will Eala.
So the ball with the number 1. Who's got the ball with the number 1? Wins a down low.
Straight set
Hand
win
is back.
for Eala. And this is how she did it in terms of
Made the difference tonight.
No, I think I kept the intensity well throughout the match. She's a very intense player and has really good shots, so I'm really happy with the win.
And you also had a lot of fans supporting you here in Linz tonight. A lot of fans from the Philippines, but I heard they actually live in Austria. Some of them are in Jeļena, some of them in Linz, in Salzburg. What did it mean to you to also have a lot of people cheering for you?
It means so much. Hello mga kababayan. Hindi ko inakala ang dami ninyo dito sa Linz, pero salamat sa pagsubaybay sa mga laban ko at magkita tayo tomorrow. Yes.
And going back to Linz, I know it's your first time here. How do you enjoy it so far?
I think it's amazing. I'm really happy with how they've welcomed me and welcomed the Filipinos. I think I guess we match really well because there are a lot of them here. So I'm really thankful for the hospitality. I hope to discover your culture more and have some fun on the court.
And I guess the fans are having some fun tonight, of course, celebrating you. Congrats once again and all the best for the rest of the tournament.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Das ist Alexandra Eala von den Philippinen.
There is a highly toxic, deeply unrealistic, and entirely manufactured illusion perpetuated by the traditional sports media that aggressively demands elite athletes operate completely devoid of all fundamental human emotion. The archaic tennis establishment desperately wants you to believe that true, immortal generational champions are essentially biological cyborgs, meticulously programmed to step onto the court, flawlessly execute their biomechanical programming, aggressively destroy their opponents without blinking, and walk back into the locker room with an entirely blank, sociopathic expression on their faces. But when you are a young, 20-year-old prodigy, actively carrying the massive, suffocating, and incredibly heavy athletic hopes, dreams, and immense national pride of over 115 million people, the sheer psychological pressure actively builds up inside your chest like a terrifying, highly volatile tectonic fault line waiting to violently rupture. Welcome back to Ples our Kurt Pro, the absolute undisputed premier destination on the internet for the raw, unapologetic, and completely unfiltered truth behind the ruthless business, the agonizing locker room psychology, and the elite tactical biomechanics of the WTA Tour. Today, we are actively, ruthlessly tearing down the robotic illusion of modern professional tennis, because what exactly transpired on the center court of the Upper Austria Ladies Linz Open was not just a routine, statistically dominant straight sets victory. We are talking about the completely awe-inspiring, tactically flawless, and incredibly emotional showdown between the Philippines' very own global sensation, Alexandra Eala, and the fiercely determined Austrian veteran Julia Grabher. The final, official box score undeniably reads as a crushing, systematic, absolute straight sets victory for Eala, sitting incredibly comfortably at 6-4, 6-3. She successfully survived the absolute deepest, darkest waters of a highly orchestrated, deeply partisan Austrian trap. But the absolute defining, immortal, cinematic image of this specific match was not a massive, cross-court forehand winner, and it was not the polite, post-match handshake at the net. The ultimate defining image was the exact, undeniable millisecond after the final point was officially secured, when Alexandra Eala dropped her racket to the crushed red dirt, buried her face in her hands, and let out an incredibly raw, deeply powerful, and intensely viral flood of emotional tears. We are going to aggressively break down the terrifying statistical anomalies of this match, the suffocating breakpoint pressure she had to miraculously survive, the absolute serving masterclass she delivered, and exactly why those specific tiers explicitly prove that she is the single most psychologically resilient, dangerously motivated young superstar on the entire planet right now. Buckle up, hit that subscribe button, turn on your notifications, and let us ruthlessly dissect the absolute anatomy of a crushing victory and an emotional masterpiece. To truly, deeply comprehend the sheer, staggering magnitude of the athletic danger and the immense psychological warfare that Alexandra Eala was actively enduring on that temporary indoor clay court, you have to entirely throw away the massive discrepancy in their global star power and look directly into the deeply agonizing, highly pressurized mathematical flow of the match itself. The Austrian tournament organizers desperately banked on this exact, highly explosive, highly volatile scenario. They meticulously constructed this massive, temporary 3,000-seat arena in the absolute center of the city to act as an absolute claustrophobic pressure cooker, specifically and deliberately designed to heavily amplify the emotional momentum of their 29-year-old hometown hero. Julia Grabher stepped onto that crushed red brick, knowing exactly what her singular, desperate mission was: to make the young Filipina prodigy completely and utterly miserable. Grabher completely understood that she was facing a vastly superior, biomechanically elite offensive juggernaut engineered by the absolute greatest minds at the Rafa Nadal Academy, so she threw the traditional, polite tactical playbook entirely out the window and aggressively initiated an absolute chaotic, muddy dogfight. She did not politely roll over for the rising star. She fought with the desperate, clawing, frantic, and deeply physical intensity of a seasoned athlete desperately defending her literal home soil from a highly publicized foreign invader. When you look directly at the highly detailed official match statistics that were just released, there is one specific, absolutely glaring, terrifying number that completely explains exactly why Eala was brought to tears of sheer, unadulterated relief at the end of the match. Julia Grabher successfully generated a staggering 10 separate breakpoint opportunities throughout the duration of this incredibly tense, heavily contested two-set match. 10 incredibly dangerous, potentially match-altering opportunities. Let that sheer, suffocating volume of defensive pressure completely process in your mind for a second. In modern, professional clay court tennis, allowing your opponent to repeatedly knock on the door of your service game 10 different times is an absolute, undeniable recipe for a catastrophic, humiliating, globally broadcasted upset. It explicitly indicates that Eala's service games were constantly under massive, heavy siege from the baseline. It mathematically proves that the partisan Austrian crowd was constantly, deafeningly roaring, violently sensing the vulnerability, and aggressively attempting to inject their own chaotic, toxic energy directly into Eala's physical strike zone. Every single time Eala stepped up to the service line to bounce the ball, she was staring directly down the barrel of a massive, momentum-shifting crisis. This was the absolute definition of extreme, red alert athletic danger. Grabher was actively forcing the young Filipina star into deeply uncomfortable, high-stakes defensive corners where a single, microscopic, unforced error could have completely derailed the entire tournament, shattered her momentum from the sunshine double, and spawned 1,000 negative media articles questioning her ability to translate her hard-court success to the heavy European dirt. But it is precisely within this massive, suffocating, entirely hostile crucible of ultimate danger that true, immortal, generational champions are officially forged. And this brings us directly to the most spectacular, awe-inspiring, and cold-blooded statistical metric of the entire Linz Open showdown. The concept of the clutch gene is heavily and aggressively debated in modern sports analytics, but Alexandra Eala just provided the entire scientific and athletic community with undeniable, physical, mathematical proof of its absolute existence. Facing 10 incredibly high-pressure, emotionally draining, physically exhausting breakpoints in front of a completely hostile, deeply partisan foreign arena is more than enough to completely shatter the psychological resolve of 99% of the players currently sitting in the top 50 of the WTA Tour. Most young, inexperienced athletes would completely panic under that terrifying, crushing weight. They would violently rush their service motion, double fault into the net, aggressively overhit their ground strokes, and instantly surrender the geometric advantage to the screaming crowd. But Alexandra Eala completely, violently refused to break. Out of those 10 terrifying high-stakes breakpoint opportunities, Julia Grabher was only able to successfully convert exactly one single breakpoint out of 10 desperate clawing attempts. That is a completely devastating, psychologically crushing, and mathematically fatal 10% conversion rate for the Austrian veteran. On the opposite side of the net, Eala was operating with the terrifying, unblinking, machine-like efficiency of a completely seasoned, emotionless assassin. When Eala aggressively manufactured her own breakpoint opportunities against Grabher's serve, she was absolutely, ruthlessly efficient, successfully converting 3 out of her 7 total attempts for a highly elite, match-defining 42% execution rate. This massive, glaring statistical discrepancy completely and entirely dictates the true, underlying, undeniable narrative of the match. It definitively proves that Alexandra Eala possesses a terrifying, almost inhuman level of emotional regulation and tactical maturity during the actual points that mathematically dictate the outcome of the match. When the pressure reached its absolute maximum, boiling, explosive limit, Grabher completely panicked, her biomechanics tightened up, and she entirely failed to execute her aggressive game plan. Conversely, when Eala was pushed to the absolute brink of geometric disaster, she calmly, methodically relied heavily on her elite, deeply ingrained Spanish training to hit her exact spots, aggressively dictate the deep baseline rallies, and completely, mercilessly erase 9 separate breakpoint threats. She was an absolute terrifying ice queen during the high-stakes rallies, which makes her post-match emotional release even more profoundly beautiful. Eala mentally, psychologically, and mathematically broke Julia Grabher long before the final match point was ever actually played on the court. This terrifying level of mental fortitude and absolute clutch execution seamlessly translates directly into the incredibly brilliant, highly nuanced, and entirely dominant serving masterclass that Eala actively utilized to survive this dangerous Austrian trap. When you casually glance at the top-line statistics of the box score, you might falsely, ignorantly assume that Eala struggled with her pure power, because the official sheet explicitly shows she recorded absolutely 0 aces throughout the entire match, while Grabher managed to secure 3. The traditional, lazy sports media loves to blindly obsess over massive, flashy, 120-mile-per-hour aces that look absolutely incredible on a 30-second social media highlight reel. But in the incredibly gritty, highly complex, deeply strategic, and agonizing reality of European clay court tennis, raw, unadulterated power is entirely meaningless if it is not heavily paired with surgical, completely unyielding precision. Eala completely understood that she did not need to desperately blast aces past Grabher to win this match. She simply needed to completely suffocate her with relentless, agonizing mathematical consistency. The statistics are absolutely undeniable, and they paint a picture of total domination. Eala landed a highly impressive, incredibly reliable 73% of her first serves directly into the service box, compared to Grabher's significantly lower, vastly inferior 67%. By constantly aggressively maintaining that elite, highly elevated first serve percentage, Eala actively prevented Grabher from ever establishing a truly comfortable, aggressive rhythm on the return game. It is not just about making the serve. It is about the heavy, highly engineered, deeply penetrating biomechanical action she aggressively placed on the ball. Eala won a massive, highly efficient 69% of her first serve points, completely outclassing Grabher, who only managed to win 64% of her own. And the most glaring, undeniable, absolute proof of this massive serving dominance is found directly in the raw volume of points won. Eala secured a massive 53 total points strictly on her own serve, heavily protecting her service games, and successfully holding serve 9 separate times to constantly keep the agonizing pressure squarely on the Austrians' shoulders. Grabher, conversely, was constantly physically fighting for her athletic life on her own serve, only managing to secure 35 service points and holding serve a meager 6 times. Eala utilized her serve not as a blunt, reckless weapon, but as a highly precise, deeply intelligent surgical scalpel, meticulously carving up Grabher's defensive positioning and surviving the absolute most dangerous moments of the match through pure, unadulterated, overwhelming consistency. We absolutely must address the deeply fascinating, highly complex, and somewhat paradoxical dynamic of the receiving statistics because it perfectly highlights the severe, agonizing frustration that Julia Grabher experienced throughout this entire, grueling ordeal. The official box score explicitly reveals a very strange, seemingly contradictory statistic that heavily underscores the sheer danger of this matchup and the absolute brilliance of Eala's tactical execution. Julia Grabher actually won 30 total receiving points, while Alex Eala only won 23. To a completely untrained casual tennis observer, that specific, isolated statistic might falsely suggest that Grabher was actually the far more aggressive, dominant returner, and that she somehow deserved to win the match or push it to a decisive third set. But in the ruthless, highly analytical, utterly unforgiving reality of professional tennis, aggressively compiling empty receiving points without actually successfully securing the breaks of serve is exactly like aggressively compiling massive amounts of offensive yardage in an NFL game, but constantly fumbling the football directly on the 1-yard line. It is completely, entirely meaningless and utterly demoralizing if it does not result in actual, tangible games won on the scoreboard. Grabher was actively, desperately winning the incredibly irrelevant points, the points when Eala was already comfortably up 40-love or 40-15, where the pressure was completely off and Eala was simply rolling the ball in. But the exact, terrifying millisecond the score reached 30-all, or deuce, or a critical, match-defining breakpoint, Eala immediately violently shifted into an entirely different, untouchable athletic gear. Eala was actively, brilliantly playing the scoreboard, exactly like a seasoned, 20-year veteran of the tour. She completely understood that she did not need to desperately expend massive amounts of physical and emotional energy to win every single meaningless point. She only needed to brutally, flawlessly execute during the exact points that actually, mathematically mattered. She essentially allowed Grabher to completely exhaust herself physically and emotionally by fighting tooth and nail for irrelevant points, only to coldly, mathematically, and ruthlessly deny her the actual games. It is a highly advanced, deeply demoralizing form of tactical psychological torture on the tennis court, and it is exactly why the final scoreline reads 12 total games won for Eala and only 7 for Grabher. Eala secured 76 total points to Grabher's 65, proving absolute overall dominance. Eala completely mastered the internal pacing, the dangerous fluctuations of momentum, and the intense emotional rhythm of the matchup, completely outsmarting a veteran 9 years her senior. Now, we absolutely must address the incredibly powerful, deeply human, and highly viral moment that completely captivated the entire global tennis world the exact second the match concluded. The emotional tears. To the completely uneducated casual sports fan, seeing a heavily favored athlete aggressively break down in tears after winning a seemingly routine first-round match in straight sets might seem like a bizarre, unwarranted overreaction. But in the ruthless, highly analytical, utterly unforgiving reality of global professional tennis, those tears were the absolute ultimate manifestation of massive, unprecedented psychological relief. You have to actively, deeply visualize the sheer, terrifying, completely unquantifiable weight that Alexandra Eala is currently carrying on her 20-year-old shoulders every single time she laces up her shoes. She is absolutely not just playing for herself. She is not just playing for lucrative prize money, corporate endorsements, or highly coveted WTA ranking points. She is the absolute, undisputed, singular athletic pride of an entire nation. Over 115 million passionate Filipinos follow her every single movement, completely living and dying by every single forehand winner and unforced error she makes on a completely different continent. The massive, suffocating expectations placed upon her by her country, her corporate sponsors, and the incredibly demanding global tennis media are completely astronomical and border on absolute insanity. Furthermore, she was actively battling the incredibly toxic, deeply entrenched media narrative that she might simply be a hard-court specialist who would eventually stumble, falter, and fail on the heavy, demanding European clay. She walked into a completely hostile, foreign arena. She stared directly into the faces of 3,000 screaming fans who desperately wanted to see her fail. She faced 10 terrifying breakpoints that threatened to completely derail her massive momentum, and she had to physically and mentally fight for every single inch of that crushed red dirt for nearly 2 hours. When she finally hit that ultimate match point, securing her undeniable dominance, the massive psychological dam completely violently broke. Those specific tears were absolutely not tears of weakness, and they were certainly not tears of sadness or fragility. They were the incredibly raw, deeply powerful tears of an elite, battle-hardened athletic warrior who had just successfully survived the absolute darkest, most terrifying depths of the gladiator arena and emerged completely victorious, holding her shield high. It was the massive, visceral release of all the anxiety, all the incredibly grueling training blocks at the Rafa Nadal Academy, all the exhausting international travel, and all the suffocating external pressure completely leaving her body at the exact same time. The traditional sports establishment demands that athletes act like emotionless robots, but Alexandra Eala's tears definitively proved that she is incredibly, beautifully human. And that specific humanity is exactly what makes her such a completely terrifying, unstoppable force of nature on the WTA Tour. An athlete who deeply feels the immense gravity of the moment, an athlete who completely understands the massive stakes of her journey and cares deeply enough to cry when she survives a brutal trap match, is an athlete who will absolutely never casually surrender during a high-stakes Grand Slam final. She is fighting for something infinitely bigger than just a silver trophy by aggressively conquering Julia Grabher, completely silencing the deafening Austrian crowd, overcoming 10 terrifying breakpoints, executing a flawless serving masterclass, and allowing herself to feel the massive emotional weight of the victory. Eala has officially undergone a massive, undeniable psychological evolution. She has proven to herself and to the entire terrified European tennis establishment that she can aggressively absorb the absolute highest levels of athletic distress, stare disaster directly in the face, and still deliver a crushing, mathematically flawless execution. As she aggressively advances deeper into the tournament draw, the massive looming shadow of former French Open champion Jeļena Ostapenko is waiting in the absolute center of the bracket. But after witnessing the sheer, unadulterated mathematical execution and the unbelievable mental survival skills that Eala just unleashed to escape the Austrian danger zone, the paradigm of global women's tennis has officially, violently shifted, and the old guard is officially on notice. The absolute era of Alexandra Eala is here. She has survived the ultimate danger, and she is coming for the absolute crown. Ensure you are permanently subscribed to Court Pro as we continue to ruthlessly document the greatest athletic ascension in modern tennis history.